Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for the Department of Public Works' first ever virtual public information meeting. We hope that everyone and their families are staying safe and healthy during this time. My name is Jason Kaufman, Senior Civil Engineer for the Town of Greenwich. Tonight, we will be presenting preliminary conceptual ideas for improving the intersections of Brookside Drive and Valley Drive with Glenville Road near Central Greenwich. We are early on the process and look forward to receiving public input along the way. Just would like to go over a few housekeeping items first. This presentation will be recorded and posted to the project website link, which will be provided at the end of this presentation. All questions will be answered at the end as well. To submit questions at the end, please utilize the raise hand feature located on your Zoom screen towards the bottom. And if you are a phone participant, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. In addition, an email address will be provided at the end to send in additional questions. Tonight's agenda will be, I will be giving a small introduction. Our design consultants from Stantec Consulting Services will give the project overview, additional project impacts, and then we will take questions and some comments at the end. The goals of tonight's presentation are to provide an overview of the project, review initial findings of the traffic study, review project impacts and opportunities, discuss next steps, and receive questions and comments. Most importantly, we want to hear from you all. Now for the purpose and need of this project, which is again Glenville Road intersection improvements at Brookside Drive and Valley Drive. The primary goal of this project is to improve safety at both intersections. We've received many letters over the years, many calls, and complaints about these intersections being dangerous, congested, and difficult to maneuver. Secondary goals of this project are to improve traffic circulation and possibly introduce traffic calming measures. There are several other project considerations that I'd like to touch on. While they will not be covered in detail at today's presentation, they will be covered in future presentations. The first being a potential realignment or relocation of Eagle Hill School's driveways to line up with one of the intersections. There is a potential for a sidewalk leading to Lake Avenue. There are other flood control initiatives within the project area that will be coordinated with this project. There are subsurface infrastructure and utility relocations and coordination that will have to go on as part of this project. There are environmental permitting procedures and town approvals that will have to be obtained, specifically the town's municipal improvement process and the town's inland wetland and watercourse agency approval process. There may be some private property impacts for the proposed project. And finally, there are construction approach and sequencing items that will need to be addressed in the future. Again, all of these items, as others, will be addressed throughout the design process. At this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our design consultants from Stantec Consulting Services.
Thank you, Jason. I'm Kent Gannon, project manager and civil engineer at Stantec. As Jason said, we are hired by the town as the consulting engineers for this project. And I'll be running through the majority of the presentation with some help from one of my colleagues, Chris Mojica. You'll hear from Chris a little later as we get into a bit more detail discussing traffic within the project corridor. Before we really get deeper into the presentation, I think it's important to reiterate some of the points Jason has made. Notably, we are still very early in the project development process. This is what we would consider the first phase or the feasibility phase of the project's evolution. So while true, we have studied the project corridor and developed some conceptual design options, which we'll present later, there's still a lot of work and decisions that will be made during any subsequent phases, and especially once we've progressed into the actual detailed design process. So please keep all that in mind during the presentation, and especially when we open up the public comment portion of tonight's agenda. You know, we certainly do our best to answer all questions, but try as we might, we may not have every answer, or at least every answer in the detail you're looking for at this early stage of the project. Last point before we move on, please bear with us as well as we make our way through the presentation. I apologize in advance if I skip too many slides in accident or my mouse makes too many appearances on your screen. I think we're all adapting to a new way of doing things, and especially when it comes to presenting these types of projects to the public. So with that said, let's jump back into the project. I just want to check to make sure you can hear me all right. Jason, can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's much better now.
Okay. I apologize if I was a little low there. I'll try to speak a little louder or more directly into the microphone as we move forward. With that said, this first slide gives a good high-level visual overview of the area of which our study was focused. This is obviously the area highlighted in green and outlined in orange for those who are following the presentation along. If you're on the phone, I apologize for some of the things we may say, as you might not be able to see exactly what I'm explaining, but I'll do my best to describe in best detail as possible what we're talking about. And to further orient everyone, from this point forward, any plan or aerial you'll see, north will always be pointing up on the screen, so just keep that in mind. The road that bisects the slide east-west, which is left-right in this area, is Glenville Road. So our project was really focused on the area of Glenville Road between the Valley Drive and Brookside Drive intersections, including the intersections themselves. A couple of other important highlights within the study area. The Eagle Hill School driveway is located in the middle of the project corridor, almost equidistant between Valley and Brookside Drives. The school is located just north of the project corridor. There's a little blue tag that says Eagle Hill School, which kind of gives you an idea of its location. You'll also see Horseneck Brook, which runs through the project area. It's represented by the bright blue line that parallels both Glenville and Brookside. And for those of you who are listening, you can also see in the presentation, there's small speed limit signs. It's worth noting that Glenville is posted at 30 miles an hour, but has a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit through the school zone when the sign is flashing. Brookside is also posted at 30 miles per hour, while Valley is at 25. We do also have speed data available for Glenville Road as well. And the data tells us the 85th percentile speed for the road is 35 miles per hour. The 85th percentile speed is a typical value. It's referenced and often used in engineering studies. And it gives a value which indicates the speed at which 85% of the drivers are at or below. So in this case, along Glenville Road, it can be expected that 85% of vehicles are traveling at or below 35 miles per hour. Now that we've given a brief overview of the project corridor limits, here's a look at 3 intersections we focused our traffic analysis on when evaluating improvements. These three intersections will be discussed and referenced in the next few slides, and also once we get a bit further into the presentation and begin to get a bit more detail regarding improvement options in traffic operations. Just reading off the intersections, west to east or left to right on your screen. We have Glenville Road at Valley Drive, Glenville Road at the Eagle Hill School driveway, and Glenville Road at Brookside Drive. The next few slides will further focus on existing conditions and will help feature the conditions of the existing intersections I listed on the last slides. We'll work our way through the corridor west to east with a couple of existing conditions, photographs for each, I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with this project area, but hopefully if you're having a hard time remembering or picturing anything, this will help jog your memory. The first intersection we're going to highlight here is Glenville at Valley. I think the aerial gives a crisp look at the intersection conditions. You can see Valley is stop controlled with a small splitter island. Stay left of the island if you want to turn left, right? Stay right of the island if you're traveling eastbound along Glenville. You'll also notice a small left turn slip lane on Glenville for those intending to make that move onto Valley. Picture A in the upper right-hand corner is looking eastbound along Glenville as you approach the intersection with Valley. You can see the free flow condition along Glenville. In other words, there's no stop signs. And you can just barely make out the left turn lane onto Valley. In the distance, you can see it looks like a car's kind of making that movement onto that left turn lane to eventually turn left down Valley. Picture B shows the splitter island and stop control as you approach Glenville Road along Valley Road. Moving along, this slide features the area of Glenville between the Valley and Brookside intersections. Visible north of Glenville are the entrance and exit lanes for the Eagle Hill School property. The entrance and exit lanes are divided by a large landscaped area and stone building. Just highlight that. So that's this area here. Here's the entrance in. This is the exit. The exit lane has both left and right turn bays onto Glenville, while the entrance is one lane into the school property. Picture A on the bottom left-hand part of the screen is looking eastbound. Picture B focuses westbound with the entrance drive to the Eagle Hill School clearly visible. The background aerial on this slide also gives a nice focus picture of the study area with turn lanes, stop bars, driveways, and the road striping clearly visible. Our last existing condition slide focuses on the Brookside and Glenville intersection. Just like at Valley, we have stop control on the minor street or Brookside Drive for this location. In this location, however, right turns from Brookside onto Glenville Road are prohibited. The skew or angle at which the two roads intersect make it the right turn maneuver very challenging here. I think the aerial photo shows this intersection angled nicely, with the two roads intersecting at about a 30-degree angle. Picture A gives a good perspective of the view traveling westbound along Glenville, heading down the hill as you approach the Brookside Drive intersection. Picture B, which is pointed northwest on Brookside Drive, and again shows the skewed approach at this intersection. Now we've gotten into the crash history along Glenville Road with this slide. Jason mentioned earlier that providing safety improvements was one of the primary goals of the project. Therefore, this slide is important to give a quick glimpse into the crash history between 2016 and 2018. The 2016 to 2018 time period is actually the latest 3-year window that crash data is available. So again, this does not represent any crashes during 2019, but this is the best data we have on hand. Just kind of reading west to east, Glenville at Valley, there were 6 recordable incidents, 2 at the Glenville and Eagle Hill driveway, 5 at Glenville and Brookside Drive. Sometimes, however, I think the crash history doesn't tell the whole story of an intersection or roadway corridor. So we went ahead and watched the video that was recorded as part of the traffic data collection portion of our study. We did this in order to evaluate near misses in the area of Glenville and Brookside. A near miss, I think, can be categorized or defined as a vehicle making a sudden braking or swerving maneuver in order to avoid a crash. We found 20 such occurrences with only a 10-hour window in the video, which we believe speaks more honestly to the true safety of the intersection and corridor versus just the recorded number of crashes themselves. You can imagine the number of near misses extrapolated over that same 3-year time period covered in the crash history. Slide 14 highlights the level of traffic experienced on average along each segment of the roadway. The main traffic flow, within this area is obviously along Glenville, with about 8,500 vehicles a day, which is it's a considerable level of flow. Both Brookside at 3,400 and Valley at 4,600 vehicles a day have less daily traffic, but not an insignificant amount by any stretch of the imagination. This traffic information that we show here was taken from traffic counts, which were completed in October of last year. Now that we've laid the groundwork and discussed some of the existing conditions, it's time to get into the improvement options we evaluated and what each option brought to the table. Overall, this list represents the 4 options we developed to a conceptual level and evaluated. As we progress in the presentation a little bit, we'll get into a bit more detail on each of the following slides. It's worth noting we also evaluated a no-build option, which will be reviewed when we get into the traffic operations portion of the presentation. The no-build is also used as a basis of comparison when we evaluate the proposed improvements in a number of categories. So just quickly reading off the options. Option 1, we have the realignment reconfiguration of Brookside Drive at Glenville Road. Option 2, we have signalization at Valley Drive and Brookside Drive intersections. Option 3, roundabouts at Valley Drive and Brookside Drive intersections. And finally, option 4, realignment of Brookside Drive at Glenville Road and roundabout at Valley Drive. We also refer to this as the hybrid of option 1 and option 3. And I think when we show the plan, you'll see why it's referred to it this way. So option 1, this is the realignment reconfiguration of Brookside Drive at Glenville Road. Option 1 focused mainly on improvements at the Brookside Drive and Glenville Road intersection. Mainly the changes tied to teeing up the Brookside Drive approach to Glenville to remove the dramatic skew currently present. So just to demonstrate that a little bit, we took Brookside Drive, which currently, if you can follow my pointer, follows this orientation and connects to Glenville here, creating this 30-degree skew. What we did was squared this up or teed this up so this intersection intersects Glenville. Brookside intersects Glenville at a more 90-degree angle. I think realigning the intersection this way helps really deliver 2 enhancements. First, safety-wise, it improves the intersection sight distance when looking left at the Brookside stop, while also relieving the strain that may be caused trying to look right to see vehicles approaching westbound on Glenville. So you can imagine, right, you're stopped here when you're looking back in this direction and vehicles are traveling westbound. They're kind of almost looking behind you. Obviously, an increased sight distance directly correlates to more time for drivers to evaluate and make decisions before safely completing any turning maneuver. And second, circulation-wise, realigning the intersection this way allows a safe right turn from Brookside onto Glenville. This is the movement that's currently prohibited as it requires an almost U-turn-like effort to complete. In addition to the changes we mentioned within Brookside, the improvements provide both right and left turn lanes from Glenville onto Brookside. This just helps to keep traffic moving along the Glenville corridor. I think also worth noting here, and this will carry through with some of the other options we discuss. The design shown has slightly less impervious area when compared to existing conditions. What that essentially means is that option 1 is less area of pavement than the existing intersection configuration. It's not a large difference as we've effectively relocated the roadway onto a portion of land that is currently not paved. However, this layout presents an opportunity to recapture the space where Brookside Drive is currently located and provide additional landscaping or even some green infrastructure. And if you're familiar with green infrastructure, this would consist of something like landscaped bioretention area or a water quality swale or something along those lines. The bioretention area or similar improvement can be used to attenuate any peak runoff while also providing tangible improvements to stormwater quality, which are both good things. Some of the concerns with this option revolve around the grading, earthwork necessary to square up the intersection, as well as private property impacts and the need for utility pole relocations near the intersection. Something else I think that's worth noting here, and will be a theme throughout the other options, is trying to utilize as much of the existing roadway bed and existing infrastructure as possible. I think I'll hit up on that a little bit more as we get into option 3 and why we kind of took the design approach we did there. The next option we want to discuss is the signalization. And this second option evaluated traffic operations at the study intersection when placing traffic signals at both the Valley and Brookside intersections with Glenville. With this approach, the Valley Drive intersection geometry would be mostly unchanged, with the improvements mainly consisting of the new traffic signal equipment and minor striping. However, we would anticipate realigning the Brookside junction at Glenville to create more traditional signalized intersection geometry, very similar to option 1, only with the traffic signal versus a T intersection with stop control. Something I'd like to mention here as well is that we didn't just decide to throw traffic signals as an option, run through a simulation, and then just see what happens on the back end. There is an engineered approach to evaluating intersections and whether signals are warranted. So we completed that study, and the analysis did determine that signals are warranted at both the Brookside and Valley intersections with Glenville Road. With that said, even if signals are justified by a warrant analysis, it doesn't actually always mean it's the best option for that location, as the installation of a signal may actually result in increased vehicular delay or even increases in certain crash types, such as rear end collisions. Now onto option 3. This is the roundabout at Valley Drive and Brookside Drive intersections. This third option transforms the way both the Valley and Brookside Drive intersections operate. This option would replace both existing unsignalized intersections with roundabouts. Each roundabout would be 3-legged and designed to fit within the existing right-of-way area, with the goal of eliminating the private property impacts that might be present with the other options. And also reutilizing as much of the current pavement structure and infrastructure as possible. As with all options, we anticipate the installation of new catch basins and manholes as necessary to collect stormwater runoff and tie into the existing storm sewer network. These roundabouts would be designed to Connecticut DOT and FHWA standards, with a fire truck and school bus as a design vehicle. In other words, the roundabouts, while not very large, would still allow emergency vehicles and school buses to effectively operate and maneuver through the intersection. This style of intersection also provides a yield, entry, low speed, free flowing approach, and when designed properly, can help provide a measure of traffic calming through the roadway corridor. In addition, the roundabout can also provide opportunities for gateway or other aesthetic improvements, and these can be added to the roundabout's central island. So we don't have any landscape improvements shown in this conceptual design, but these central islands can be landscaped if that's something that's desired. And like I briefly stated, the roundabouts shown in this slide have been designed to accommodate both fire trucks and school buses as the design vehicle. Issues can arise with larger vehicles attempting to make some movements through the roundabout of this size. Therefore, it's typical to provide portions of mountable central island or even a completely mountable central island to accommodate the rare larger vehicle in the intersection. Our conceptual design, some of the darker hatched area represents some areas we envision some mountable island. One difficulty with this option, however, is the construction of the roundabout at the Brookside intersection. The current topography of the site doesn't lend itself well to a traditional roundabout layout. The steep grades require the roundabout be pitched all toward one side or toward the brook, and at slopes steeper than traditionally implemented within a roundabout. You typically want a roundabout within a relatively flat area, such as the Valley Drive and Glenville intersection. This allows you to drain water away from the central island and take a more traditional approach. You'll typically see retrofitted roundabout intersections in rather flat intersections. And for those of you who would like to see an in-town example, an existing roundabout at the intersection of Havemeyer Lane and Northbridge Road is shown here. This is a good example of a roundabout with a comparable size and layout to some degree for what you could expect at the two intersections within our project corridor. The last option we evaluated is what we refer to as the hybrid option. This option takes portions of option 1 and option 3 to create a fourth hybrid approach. The option has the realignment of Brookside Drive at Glenville Road, first shown in option 1. And it also has the roundabout at Valley Drive and Glenville Road presented in option 3. All the previous points discussed with option 1 and 3 still hold true for this hybrid option. The option provides traffic calming, gives opportunities for green infrastructure and or landscape additions, but may also require some grading and earthwork, utility relocations, and right-of-way acquisition to accommodate the changes at the Brookside Drive approach to Glenville Road. One of the things I neglected to mention in the other options is the extra space or lane width, or median area, if you so call it, created around the Eagle Hill School entrances. That's really this area here. The options either through the addition of a turn lane or the implementation of a roundabout create this extra space in this median type area, which can be used as either a turn lane or refuge space for vehicles turning into the Eagle Hill School entrance. This is beneficial as it allows a continued flow of traffic eastbound through the project corridor. I'm pretty sure I hit upon everything I wanted to talk about. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Mojica, and he'll discuss how we evaluated the traffic impact of each of these discussed options. Take it away, Chris, if you're ready.
Sure, thanks, Kent. I want to spend a few minutes just talking about traffic operations, and it's the discussion's slightly different in that Kent really focused on, from a traffic perspective, a lot of the safety issues. You know, he touched upon the fact that the 85th percentile speed, the speed at which most drivers are traveling is 35 miles an hour. It's above the posted speed limits of the area. He talked about the crash history, but I really want to spend a few minutes just focusing solely on the overall traffic operations. The goal here, we know, Jason mentioned that the purpose of the project is really to improve safety, but we really just want to assure that we are maintaining traffic operations or improving where possible as part of these safety improvements. From a traffic perspective, we did look at existing conditions, and Kent mentioned we looked at data from October 2019, and I'll go through that a little bit in a second. But from an evaluation perspective, because this is a design project, we're looking ahead into the future, specifically 20 years into the future. So we're looking into the year 2039. And the reason why we're doing that is just to be sure that anything that we decide to do, if we move ahead with any of these improvement options, we want to be sure that the operations and the safety, especially for this part of the presentation, the operations, hold true through, for another 20 years. We don't want to put something in here now that, won't work in 5 to 10 years. It's not a useful investment. So from a future traffic operations perspective, we focused on 2 scenarios. The first one is what we call the no build. And that really means there are no improvements. It's a do nothing scenario. It's really just maintaining what's currently out there today. The other scenario that we're looking at is what we call a build. And that's just evaluating what the improvements are, assuming any of the 4 options that Kent just talked about. And really quickly, I do want to just talk about level of service. And I apologize if you've sat through a lot of these meetings, whether in person or now virtually, and you're hearing about the same term again. But for the benefit of those who don't know about level of service, we evaluated traffic based on the overall average delay, mainly, how many seconds are you sitting at an intersection on average at the intersection. And we do overall because we're not just focusing on one specific street or an approach, we're focusing on the intersection holistically. And from a level of service perspective, there's 6 different categories of level of service. And the best way to describe this is think that you're taking an exam from high school. Level of service A or B just means that you're operating at an acceptable level, made little to no delays. Level of service C or D is really just an acceptable level of service. It means that there's some delay. It's not significant, but it's not like you're free flow all the time. And that's really what we're trying to, we generally try to design to, because you can argue that if you design something to level of service A, it could be over-designed, and obviously you don't want to design something to fail, which would be in the level of service E or F category. So just something to keep in mind as we go through some of the next couple of slides that talk about traffic operations. Next slide, Clint. So this first graphic here, and I will try my best to explain for those that are joining just on the phone, this graphic provides a visual representation or a summary of the level of service or the overall traffic operations at any of the 3 intersections. We looked at traffic in October of 2019, and we found that the peak hours are from 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning, and from 3:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon. You'll see here that all of the intersections operate at acceptable levels of service. That's level of service C or better during either peak hour at any of the intersections. The one thing I do want to note here is that there was a police officer at the Eagle Hill School driveway intersection for about 20 minutes or so in the afternoon. The traffic results here don't incorporate the presence of a police officer, and the reason for that is the traffic modeling, the way it's used, it can't replicate a police officer maintaining traffic flow at the intersection. When you have an officer at an intersection, they more or less have full autonomy to decide how traffic will flow. So they can decide to hold up Glenville Road for 2 to 3 minutes, or they can hold up the Eagle Hill School driveway for 2 to 3 minutes at their discretion. And it's not something that we can really model. So the results here really just take into account the traffic volumes that are handled during this period of time. And that's what we're going to use as the benchmark to evaluate conditions as we move ahead. You go to the next slide. So this next graphic provides what we call projected traffic operations. And all this means is, when we say projected, based on projected growth in the area, traffic growth that is, what is traffic operations going to look like in the year 2039? And the preliminary analysis more or less shows that all of the intersections will operate at an overall acceptable level of service D or better. The intersection that we look at now that is close to being unacceptable is Glenville and Brookside. That intersection operates at overall acceptable level of service D in the morning and in the afternoon. And obviously that's not to say that there isn't worse conditions along, let's say, northbound Brookside Drive, or worse conditions at the Eagle Hill School driveway. But for purposes of this study, for analysis purposes, we're looking at conditions from an overall perspective. So when we say growth, we just say that we're assuming a total of 10% growth over a 20-year period, just to give you an idea. And that's just based on recommended guidance for traffic growth in the area. And I'd like to take a few minutes just to provide a summary of the preliminary traffic analysis and If you're viewing this, I will walk you through it. I know there's a lot of information here, but what we essentially did was for both the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hour, we really looked at the traffic operations for all of the different options. So we have what we call the no build or the do nothing scenario. And then we have each of the 4 options that Kent walked you through a few minutes ago. Just to recap, option 1 is when you reconfigure the T intersection at Brookside and Glenville. Option 2 is adding signals to at Glenville, at Brookside, and at Valley. Option 3 is providing roundabouts along Glenville, at Brookside, and Valley. And then option 4 is the hybrid concept that Ken talked about, where we provide a roundabout along Glenville at Valley, and we also reconfigure the T intersection along Glenville Road at Brookside. And just from a visual perspective, you can see that there's one option that does provide poor levels of service at any of the intersections, and that's option 2 with the traffic signals. And it's somewhat counterintuitive, but it does warrant an explanation. And the intersection with the Eagle Hill driveway actually operates at an overall level of service F with the signals in place. And that's mainly because when you're adding traffic signals, you're actually making Glenville Road operate more efficiently because you're getting that traffic through as quickly as possible. And what that does is that it further exacerbates the issue for folks trying to exit at the Eagle Hill driveway, because now they have the signal that's allowing all this traffic to move through, and it's almost to their detriment. So options 1, 3, and 4 provide acceptable levels of service at all of the intersections. In some cases, they can maintain the level of service when compared to the no build, or they provide slight improvements to the overall level of service when compared to the no build. One thing I do want to touch on here is that each of these 4 options did evaluate allowing right turns from Brookside onto Glenville. We really anticipate that the traffic that would be using this movement would be local traffic, not necessarily through traffic or traffic that's destined to Greenwich Hospital, considering that they would be going way out of the way to try to avoid maybe an additional traffic signal on Route 1 to get onto Deerfield and continue up that way. The key here I want to stress is, we provided information from an operations perspective, and it's purely operations. This isn't the only reason to decide whether to make an improvement or not. Again, what we're trying to do is just to make sure that the traffic operations are acceptable to accommodate any of the safety improvements that were discussed as part of any of the 4 improvement options. And we say this is preliminary, and we do mean that. We will be looking at this a little bit further as this progresses into design. So with that, we talked about traffic safety, we talked about traffic operations, but there are several other considerations that are very important when sort of looking at all these different options. And I want to hand it back over to Kent to walk you through some of those considerations and opportunities.
Thanks, Chris. So we've compiled a short list here to try to pull everything we've discussed and everything you've heard in tonight's presentation together. This is just a short list, a reminder of some of the topics we tried to hit upon when presenting the 4 improvement options and discussing traffic operations. So obviously, some of the improvement options provide opportunities to satisfy or check off some of these bullet points more than others. And ultimately, check off or meet the project goals more so than others. But this is just a summary of the topics that tie into our next slide. And for those of you who cannot see the presentation, I'll just list them quickly. Safety improvements, traffic calming, improved traffic flow, green infrastructure, new drainage infrastructure, landscape opportunities, additions. So how do we evaluate the options against each other? This matrix is one tool we like to use to evaluate the options. Essentially, we create a matrix where we can summarize or review the benefits of each of the evaluated options against each other. The matrix shown here with pluses and minuses under a number of categories helps us to assess each option's overall impact to the project corridor, both good or bad, and how this meets the intended project goals. We've presented 7 categories here. safety improvements, traffic circulation, traffic calming, aesthetic improvements, green infrastructure, cost, and constructability. We've gone ahead and populated this matrix based on our experience, the data we've compiled and analyzed, and ultimately what we know about the area. I'm not going to go and read and get into every category or explain every plus or minus here. We'd be here for a while. But with that said, I will kind of just walk you through our thinking on at least one of the categories, and that's aesthetic improvements. And this is not to indicate the area is lacking in this category, because it most certainly isn't. It's more of an indication that some options bring more to the table in terms of adding landscaping to maintain the area's quality or potentially add to it than others. For example, we don't necessarily think that the signals bring anything aesthetically to the table. This option, which is option 2, does present green space opportunities for plantings just like option 1 and 4. But we feel it's offset by the addition of the traffic signal equipment. Therefore, it doesn't get the plus symbol options 1 and 4 receive for this category. So ultimately, how is the design option selected that we can begin to advance into preliminary and then eventually final design? This matrix is certainly part of that equation. It helps evaluate impacts, such as cost, safety improvements, traffic evaluation, etc. But it's ultimately a decision based on these factors and also public input, which is part of the reason why we're here today. So ultimately, a decision cannot be made until all these factors are fully evaluated and the public's been heard from. Which really brings us to the next slide, which is what are the next steps and what's the project schedule look like moving forward. First of all, like I just mentioned, selecting a preferred alternative is a good place to start. And once we do that, we can kind of move ahead with the project and get into preliminary and final design, permitting, completion, construction. And you'll see this outlined under the anticipated project schedule. So for now, we have finalized feasibility study, which would include selecting a preferred alternative, spring, summer 2020. Preliminary final design, we wouldn't really get into that or finalize any of that until next year. Same with any permitting completion that would revolve around the selected alternative. And then construction wouldn't really begin until 2022. Obviously, this is a fluid situation. With the current funding climate, this is subject to change, but this just gives you an idea of where our heads are at and what we're thinking moving forward. And obviously, as we move through, any further design, there'll be additional public meetings and targeted stakeholder meetings. So, we hear from the right people and we weigh everyone's concerns. The last point sort of on the slide is the anticipated funding. At this point, design would be anticipated to be 100% on the town and construction 100% funded by the state. That's all we really had as far as the formal presentation is concerned. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us for this virtual meeting. We've now reached the public comment portion of the meeting. Before we get into any questions on the screen, you'll see the directions which Jason walked through at the beginning for submitting questions, and also some project contact information if you'd like to send a question after the presentation. And lastly, there's a project website link where additional information can be found, and a recording of tonight's presentation will be uploaded. Once again, to ask a question, please use the raise hand feature on the Zoom screen. If you're a phone-only participant, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. And thank you again for participating.
Thank you, Kent. Just want to reiterate that we're here to gather input, and if you have more than 1 or 2 questions, we ask that you present us with your top 2 or 3, And then if time allows at the end, we can circle back with you. Again, we have about 26 attendees right now, so we want to make sure we give everybody equal time to ask their questions if they have any. This slide you see here we'll leave up while the question and answer period is going on. Give everyone a reference to the 4 options. And we have a poll question that we'd also like to pose to everyone. We'll leave it up in the event that you want to hear people's questions and hear the answers before you answer the poll question. But that you should see that pop up on your screen fairly soon. If you don't want to answer it just yet until you hear the answers, understandable, but there it is. Jim, if you want to start the roll call.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start with Henry Orpheus, I believe. I will just apologize now for everybody's name mispronunciation. If people, when I do allow you to talk, please state your name first and then ask your question.
This is Henry Orpheus. You got the name correct. Couple of questions. You had a slide a few slides ago that showed negatives, blanks, and positives for the results under various options. And you had negatives for the do nothing option under the column for safety, traffic circularity, and then something else, traffic, I don't know, flow or something about that. Would you explain what is wrong, in particular with the safety aspect of the current situation? And also, is that slide based on traffic pattern today or a traffic pattern as projected in 2039? Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I'll give a little response and then I'll let Stantec continue. In terms of safety, we feel that the way the intersections currently are geometrically aligned, they have inherent safety problems. In addition, we've, over the past year, we've observed in the field and by means of a 48-hour continuous video, several issues with safety. One being, the biggest one that really jumped out to us was what Kent described as near misses. We began to evaluate the near misses after discussing the project with the adjacent property owners, specifically the folks from the school, who mentioned to us that they hear on a constant basis that they're going out and hearing a lot of screeching halts and near misses. In addition to that, the traffic volumes were looked at this time period, but we've also projected them in the future at a rate of 10%. Do you want to add anything, Chris or Kent?
No, I mean, I think, Jason, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, especially with the projected traffic growth. Obviously, what we've seen, what we've experienced isn't going to be any better with more traffic out there. So that's part of the thinking there with some of the negatives.
Okay, next we have Clay Kaufman.
Hi, thank you. Just 2 questions. You had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation about maybe moving the exit for Eagle Hill School, but you didn't talk about that in the presentation. And I wondered how that might factor in. And then the second piece is, was there any consideration to the signal option not having 2 signals? I wasn't quite sure why there had to be 2 signals, especially if the Eagle Hill driveway was moved to Valley Road.
Yes, thank you, Clay, for your questions. I did mention at the beginning about various other project considerations that would not be discussed in detail at this meeting. This is a very preliminary conceptual meeting. We anticipate many more meetings, individual meetings with property stakeholders and more public meetings. So to answer your question, any one of these options could receive a relocated driveway from Eagle Hill School. We feel that, you know, if the school would like to realign their driveway, any one of these options would be able to handle that relocation of the driveway. In terms of the signals, I'll let Stantec answer that one.
Chris, do you want to?
Oh, I think he might have lost connection, he said. At this point, you know, we looked at these 4 options based on the scope of work with our design consultant. And, you know, this is the feedback we're looking for. So that may be something that we may look at, you know, moving forward, is maybe one signal versus both. But at this point, we've only looked at both.
Right. Chris is on. We're trying to get him unmuted.
Perfect. So, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
At this point? Okay. So the reason why we looked at signals at both intersections, one was we wanted to resolve traffic operations at both of those intersections, and adding the signals does allow some potential safety improvements with some of those turn movements. The other reason was when we did the warrant analysis, we found that both of the intersections with Valley and Brookside met the signal warrants. So that was another reason why we evaluated both of the intersections as signals.
Okay, the next person is Suzanne Sherwin.
Suzanne, are you there? I'm not hearing the question.
Suzanne, can you try unmuting and unmuting one more time?
Maybe we should move on and circle back.
Yeah, Suzanne, you're.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, here we go.
Perfect, thank you, sorry. So I live right by Valley Drive. My front driveway is on Glenville Road. I have a back driveway on Valley Drive. None of these options that you mentioned, and I don't mean to minimize this because I'm sure a ton of work went into this, but none of them mention the speeding that takes place on Valley Drive. By the time they come from the opposite end by the post office to Glenville Road, you know, they finally put their brakes on. So how did, you know, none of these options address that speeding that takes place. I am not in favor of any lights. I've been here 23 years, and we were always worried that that might come to fruition. And to me, that's an eyesore. I don't care if it's safe or not, but if you slow down the traffic, I would imagine there would be much fewer near misses. So I think the problem is slowing down the traffic rather than trying to, you know, reconfigure a roadway. If it seems like in one of the options, you're straightening out the road, taking away the curvature, which I find appealing. It's more countrified. Now you're making a straighter road for people to travel quicker. You know, it kind of forces them to slow down that curvature.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for your input. First, I'll address the speeding. I think specifically the roundabout at Valley and Glenville would achieve a reduction in speed. Roundabouts are typically, you'll typically see after they're put in place that speeds are reduced. If I'm not sure if you might be referring to speeding like further away from this study area, like going towards the post office. And if that's the case, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that offline and maybe find a solution or talk with the police department. In terms of your comment about straightening out the road, I just want to clarify that on Glenville Road, we are not realigning the roadway. We're not proposing to realign the roadway at all. These improvements are going to take place within the existing curvature of the roadway. On Brookside Drive, we are actually proposing to eliminate the more straightness of Brookside entering into Glenville Road. So when you're traveling east on Glenville Road, and I take this way pretty, well, not right now because we're not at work, but when we're at work pretty much every day, when you're traveling east on Glenville to Brookside, that curve onto Brookside is extremely wide open. And what you see in observations is that people take that right turn extremely fast. We feel that by realigning Brookside and creating more of a traditional T intersection and a curvature leading into Glenville Road, it actually will slow traffic down approaching that intersection and have an improvement to safety.
Okay, next we have Susan without a last name. So if you could just, Susan, if you can just state your first and last name, please. Okay, Susan, you will need to unmute yourself if you can.
Still muted.
Still muted. Susan will have to come back to you. I'm going to allow Elliot Benton to talk.
This is Elliot and Janetta Benton at 28 Glenville Road. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I have actually 5 questions, which gives me 6 seconds a question. What's the funding status given the changes that the BET has made to the capital budget? Have you evaluated private property impacts in each of these options? I didn't notice that as one of the project impacts, which surprised me a bit. What is the additional cost, if any, for the cut and fill associated with option 3, circle at Glenville Brookside? Can the T intersection with Brookside be moved west so it doesn't impact our property? And what are the costs for each of the 4 options? Sure.
If I can just say something, we would be the ones most impacted. I'm looking out the window and I can see this intersection. I'm strongly in favor of option 3, putting in a traffic circle. I think it would look good from an aesthetic point of view, which is one of the major appeals of life in Greenwich. We've lived here for 35 years, and I do think that that is the most desirable solution. Leveling the ground is really not an issue. It would be very simple to do. You'd simply build up the point, the triangle of our property. and we would be absolutely in favor of doing so.
What do you,
Thank you very much, Elliot. And I didn't catch the other person's name.
Annetta,
Annetta, thank you very much. I'll touch first on the funding. So we have applied, we are in the application process for a grant through Connecticut DOT called LOTSIP, which is for transportation related projects. So there's already a part of this project that's kind of been vetted as a good project. They've seen some of the concepts. They've accepted it as a good project to move forward with. But that's for construction funding. In terms of design funding, we've requested additional funds to complete the design. It's undetermined at this point if that funding is going to be granted in this budget cycle. If it's not granted in this budget cycle, we'll look to seek for it again next year. It's the private property impacts. I'm not sure, maybe you had missed the first couple of slides, but I gave a little introduction in the beginning about other considerations that will have to be looked at in the future, but we wouldn't talk too much in detail about today. One of those was impacts to private property. And yes, you're correct on options 1, 2, and 4. There would be a potential impact to the corner of your property. I think during the design process, if one of those is chosen, we would look to minimize that impact as much as possible, and look at greater detail at potential grading changes and whatnot. Next, you had asked about the additional cost for cut and fills. I think that option 1, 2, and 3 would all have the same cut and fills at that intersection. And as Annetta mentioned, if we were to go with option 3, we would have also significant fills to try and flatten out that intersection. If we were not to leave it the way it is, Chris mentioned it's not ideal for a roundabout to be on a slope. And finally, you had asked about the cost of each improvement, and I will go to Stantec to see if they have an input on that one.
Yeah, so we haven't gone to the nitty-gritty detail to evaluate and calculate all the items needed to give a really detailed cost estimate. I will say that we can kind of speak to the typical cost of what it would cost to add a traffic signal at each one, and the other, or at least option 3 and 4, which show conceptual design at each intersection. Those would be rather similar at cost. The option 1 would be similar to what it would cost, obviously, in that intersection with option 4 and option 2 to do at least the earthwork and the grading and the moving and that thing. But as far as what each number costs in detail, we don't have that yet.
I just want to hit on one other point. I know I probably touched on it a bit when I was talking about the private property impacts, but you had asked specifically if we looked at moving the T intersection further west. And I think that is something that could be looked at to see if that's feasible. As I mentioned, also to try and minimize as much as possible, the impact of private property.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Jennifer Coster. Okay, Jennifer, it is saying that you're using an older version of Zoom. So I'm going to do what we call promote you to a panelist. To say, but I need you to state your name and for the record. Okay, we're not seeing her come up, Jennifer come up. So I'm going to skip back to Mary Shaw, I believe. Okay, Mary Shaw, you're also showing up using an older version of Zoom. So hold on one second and we'll see if this works. Mary, can you hear us? Can you speak?
I don't see a microphone symbol next to her name.
Yes, I'm seeing that. I'm looking to see if there's anything else I can do.
So I'm going to read off the phone number that was included in the invitation. If anyone wants to try and call in instead of using the computer. So bear with me for 1 second here. Okay, if anyone is interested in calling in, you can please dial 1-646-518-9805. The webinar ID is 952-7345-5724. And the password is 27767.
So in the meantime, I am going to go to, is it Michelle or Michael Guite? You will need to unmute.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good. Well, so I heard a moment ago from my neighbors, the Bennett's, who said we've been here for 35 years, and I've been here for about 35 also. So hi there. We haven't seen each other for 25 years, but it's fun to be meeting here today. I kind of lean in favor of what they said, which is I think roundabouts can be really very engaging, a really sort of a nice, pleasant way to sort of encounter changes in the roadway. And I also think that the roundabout suggested down by the new entryway for Eagle Hill School could reduce a lot of the traffic that happens right now at the current entryway, which is really horrendous and really impacts us pretty directly. So I think I like the sound of all of this stuff. The one query I have is that right now, if you imagine that you're coming into Eagle Hill School, there's a little sort of a stone coach house that you pass, but right around in front of that coach house, there's perhaps a 30 by 200 foot sort of an unused paved rectangle. Sometimes the police stand there just sort of watching people going past, etc. But it's never seemed a very functional use of space. I wonder, would this have any impact on that kind of strange little dead zone of paved highway?
Thank you so much for your question and input, Michael. At the current stage, that unused paved area would remain, and part of the reason for that is there is a private driveway that enters into that area. Also, early on in the process, before we got too far into this, we looked at maybe utilizing that space for a roundabout. However, it doesn't really, it wouldn't really address the intersections with the other major roadways. And that's what we were really trying to improve the safety of, is the other two intersections. So at the current stage, the area in front of the stone building and the paved area off to the side would remain as is.
Yeah, I think just to expand on that, Jason, putting a roundabout in that area, it's difficult to get Brookside to intersect and Glenville in that area. You either have to still do something where Brookside intersects Glenville, sort of like we've shown in option 1, 2, and 4. If not, they're kind of converging very close to each other, and it's really hard to design a roundabout with two entrance exits, that close to each other. Plus, like you said, we've got a private driveway, which would have one leg of the roundabout, and plus there's two other potential legs there. So there's just a lot going on in that area. It makes it a little difficult.
I guess the other thing I will say is that we have had discussions with the school throughout this process, and they seem interested in potentially, if they want to move forward, moving their driveway to align with Valley Drive. So if that were to happen in the future, it would take some of the burden off of that location there.
Right.
But
So overall, my comment is that it seems like a promising direction. I don't know as much about it as I'd like to, but overall, I think it sounds like it could be really quite lovely.
Well, we appreciate it, and I invite you to jot down the project website. We'll be updating it as the project moves forward, and certainly invite you to join in any future meetings that we have.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, up next we have Susie, S-U-S-I-E.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Susie or Susan and Joe Gatto. We were on the computer, but it had no microphone, so we switched over to this. It's the same person who raised their hand as Susan. So we live at 146 Brookside Drive, which is the driveway that's like most impacted by the teeing of Brookside and Glenville. And we've seen early drawings of this and just wonder what it looks like now. When I was told originally it had Brookside where our driveway ends and is in some of these images expanded 8 feet above our driveway, which would be a hard climb in certainly inclement weather. We were told we couldn't have our driveway anymore at one point. It would have to go off to Glenville Road somehow. So we'd love to know what this would really look like for us in some of these options without the roundabout. It sounds awful, frankly, all of it. I like the way it is.
Yes, thank you, Susan and Joe, for joining us tonight. What's shown here today, I think when the designer began to run the traffic analysis, they saw that right turn lane off of Glenville onto Brookside would help the traffic flow and allow for those turning right to move out of the flow of traffic. And that being said, it would be a little more difficult to get the driveway to enter into Glenville. In addition to that, the traffic flow on Brookside is less than half of the flow that's on Glenville. So, you know, to have a residential driveway entering into a busier road is less desirable than it is entering into the less traveled road. In terms of the grade change, that's something that I'm not really following the 8-foot grade difference. I think it would not be as drastic as that. Does anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Jason. I unfortunately don't have the plan and with some preliminary grades on it in front of me, but I think that's something. I'm not sure it's 8 feet. There will be a little bit. Obviously, we'll need to play with the grades there in order for Brookside to match up with Glenville there. But I kind of agree with Jason. I don't think it's as drastic as 8 feet. But it's, you know, I don't want to put a number on it without actually seeing it in front of me right now.
Okay, next we have Danielle Claroni.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, it's Danielle Claroni. So I live up the street, and I have to drive by that way all the time. And I think that people, number one, do speed, but that is kind of a blind spot right there where the Brookside Drive, you know, comes in. And I think that I'm totally in favor of the circles. I think that's a much better idea. It'll slow traffic down in those areas as well. People coming up towards Valley from Glenville go really fast as well. So that's like a really dangerous little area because all these people coming in and out. And my husband's already gotten into an accident right on the Brookside area, you know, because people just drive like crazy down there. And I thought that, you know, the other lady that mentioned that Valley also has a problem. There's that intersection where Edgewood is. Maybe you could consider putting one there as well to slow people down coming down there.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate the input. I know there was a lot. Was there a question in there?
I just wanted to give you guys support. I think that the lights are going to be a problem.
Yes.
You know, that's a blind curve coming in down towards Brookside. If you're coming around and there are a bunch of cars stopped and you're not used to a light being there, you could be driving pretty fast. And I think that could cause more accidents than if there's a roundabout. And I think the roundabouts slow people down. So I'm in favor of the roundabouts.
Thank you. That's we like to hear that. I think Chris touched a little bit on that concern with stopped traffic at a light. So yes, there could be some ramifications there for sure. In terms of Edgewood, we could look at that separately in-house in the engineering division and see what there is to do there.
Yeah, if you're already putting in the circles in the other two areas, it probably would save a little money if you did them all at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Greg Schenkman.
Yes, hi. Also a neighbor on Glenville, at 18 Glenville. I'm in favor of something, and I think either the roundabouts or the kind of option 3 or 4 seem to make the most sense. My question, this might be silly when it comes to any construction, but what is the foreseeable kind of length of time for the project? as well as would it be done all at once, or would it be first one then the other intersection?
Yes, Greg, thank you for a great question. It's kind of hard at this early stage to anticipate how long construction may take, or the staging that would be required for construction. I think one overreaching theme we would want is that we wouldn't want to be closing down these roads. We wouldn't want to be doing too much at any given time. The good thing about the roundabout at Valley is that it almost entirely sits within the existing pavement area. There's a little bit of widening to the north side of that roundabout, but it really fits well within the existing pavement area, and it also really sits well within the existing topography of the intersection. So that one, the constructability would be much more favorable than the other one. I think with the teeing up of the intersection, you would be able to potentially, in a way, build up some of the new roadway while keeping the existing roadway in service, because they're in different locations.
Mm-hmm.
You would potentially be able to do some of that. The rest of it, I think we would need to, we would need to know which alternative is chosen, what utility impacts there are. I know there might be a utility pole that needs to be moved here or there. I would envision this being something that could be done in one construction season, though.
Okay.
Thank you for your question and input.
Okay, up next we have Christian Roth. While I'm getting Christian up, I did see that there are a few people on the phone, and just a reminder, if you do want to raise your hand on the phone, you do need to dial *9.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. First of all, thank you for an exceptional presentation. I would like to echo the comments made by a number of my neighbors who I'm meeting, virtually for the first time this evening, to say that option 3 strikes me as far and away the best option. My other comment would be that I'd be interested in anything that you are thinking about in terms of ways in which you would need to alert or slow traffic coming down Glenville Road, east or west, down either of the hillsides approaching Brookside or Valley. The local paper showed that a car practically went off the road and turned upside down into the creek this past week by coming fast down from Glenville past Valley. And then my other question is if you could speak at all about impact this would have for pedestrians, runners, walkers, bikers along this stretch of road. And also you touched on the possibility of a sidewalk up to Lake Avenue. So a couple of varied things, but thank you very much for your time. And again, an exceptional presentation.
Thank you, Christian. We appreciate the input and the questions. I'll touch first on the speeding and the approach to both intersections. What's not shown in these graphics, because they're very zoomed into the actual intersection, is what we would look to be doing as you approach the intersection, which would include additional signage. There are school zone flashing signs that alert drivers during certain periods of the day that there's a school zone in effect, and they actually display people's speeds. But in addition to that, we would probably be, especially if there's a roundabout, there's certain signs that are required in advance of a roundabout to notify motorists that the roundabout is coming up ahead of them, especially in these locations like several of you have mentioned tonight that, they're blind. You come up on these intersections and you don't really see them that far in advance. We definitely would want to include advanced warning signage. One thing, that's a recurring theme with speeding is, with technology now, you see a lot of these temporary and permanent speed display signs being put up. So those are the types of things that could also be looked at in the future as well. The second part you mentioned is about pedestrians and cyclists. And yes, we will be looking at a potential sidewalk leading to the Lake Avenue Circle. We haven't looked at it in too much detail right now. There are some grading, tree, and right-of-way constraints that may exist there. There also may be an opportunity for a white line that creates a sort of shoulder for people to use that area in. But yes, we will be looking at a possibility of extending this project up to Lake Avenue Circle and maybe including a sidewalk in there. But it would only lead to this intersection, basically to the school.
Understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Jim. I think one other thing I just want to note is that part of what we look at when we design our projects is trying to maintain the character of the areas, and we try and balance, the need or the necessity or the desire for sidewalks and whatnot and other items with the desire to maintain a certain character. So we don't want to, utilize the entire right-of-way and widen the road because it tends to make people think that it's more like a highway than more like a local road. So just some insight as to all the factors that we look at when designing these projects.
Okay, up next I have Chris Hikawa, I believe.
Hi, I live at the intersection of Brookside and Glenville, and I'm pretty opposed to this project and to changing that intersection, particularly the teeing of Brookside is going to bring more traffic from both 95 and coming from Putnam. People don't want to come down Brookside because they know they can't make a right onto Glenville and that they would have to go over to Deerfield to get to the Lake Avenue Circle. So there's just going to increase tremendous amounts of traffic onto Brookside and then people turning right onto Glenville and increasing a tremendous amount of traffic heading into the Lake Avenue Circle from Glenville. Have you tried considering lowering the speed limit coming down from the Lake Avenue Circle towards Brookside? Because I'm glad that you found that lights are not going to help, because I agree that you put a light there are going to be crashes all the time with people cramming into people who are stopped at a light. So have you thought about lowering the speed limit from 30 to 25 on Glenville coming down from Lake Avenue Circle? Is that?
Hello, Chris?
Yeah, no, I just, have you considered that?
Oh,
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I just object to it, and I certainly object to teeing Brookside because I just think it's going to increase traffic, not lessen it.
So thank you, Chris, for your questions and input. We have actually done a little bit of research and observations on the traffic patterns. We feel that the fact that the Route 1 intersections with Brookside and then with Deerfield. So at Brookside, as you're traveling east on Route 1, you don't have a dedicated left turn signal onto Brookside. Whereas when you get to the Chase Bank at Deerfield, you have a dedicated left turn signal onto Deerfield. In addition to that, the distance that a car has to travel when they turn left onto Brookside to get to the circle is more than if they just continued to Deerfield and took a left at the dedicated left turn lane. For those reasons, we, us and our traffic consultants both feel that no significant increase of traffic would occur from this project. You may see a slight increase from local traffic of people that live on those roads currently, but we don't feel like you would get that quote unquote cut through traffic that people may think would occur from this type of project. On your second point, talking about speed, usually when you're setting a speed limit, you're trying to set it close to that 85th percentile speed. So to lower the speed limit, I'm not sure it would be justified in this case. It also would be something that would have to be reviewed and approved by the Connecticut DOT. And they may have a similar view on the 85th percentile speed. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one, Jim, or?
Yes, I'll jump in on that one too. One thing that we did do when we went for the school zones a few years ago, one of the comments we heard or got from Connecticut DOT, because they do have to review all speed limits in town and give us review reports on them. They had actually asked us at that time if the speed limit could be increased, because this is more of a collector roadway, and we fought pretty hard to keep it at the 30 mile per hour with the 20 mile per hour during the school zone. So I don't believe that Connecticut DOT would be supportive of us changing it to 25, but it is something that we can look into and consider in the future as we progress with this project.
The other thing I'd like to note is when we have these public outreach programs and we hear input from the public and we hear about speeding, we always go back to the police department and let them know about the comments that we found and see, and, you know, request that they increase enforcement if there's a significant problem.
Okay, up next, I have a phone call number that ends in 9626. If you could, once I enable you and allow you to talk, you should be able to talk now. If you could just identify yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, it's Jim Coster, and I live at 71 Glenville Road. And I have two questions. The first is, the circle certainly seems to be an appealing option, but unless I'm missing something from my home at 71 Glenville, every other vehicle is a dump truck or an 18-wheeler. And how is that going to work, you know, with the circle? I just see that as being, you know, not manageable. And I guess the second question is kind of follows up on that. Wouldn't it be incredibly cheaper to just put a stoplight there? And I understand aesthetically it's not appealing. I get that, I really do. So those are my two questions. And by the way, I appreciate the presentation. It was, you guys have done a great job, and I really thank you for addressing this issue.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to pass the designed vehicle question to Stantec.
So I'll jump in first. This is Chris. Regarding the heavy vehicles, the trucks, we have about, I believe it's somewhere in the range of 4 to 5%. That's what was calculated based off of what we counted in October. And it was pretty consistent along all of the different approaches between the two intersections.
Well, who did, seriously, I have to take issue with that. There's no way it's 4%. Every other truck is an 18-wheeler or a dump truck. I mean, who did the testing?
So we had a company that does traffic counts do the counting. We could go back and review again. We also have a video, a 48-hour long video of both of these intersections that we could double check as well. but I believe what Chris mentioned is accurate based on the data we got from the counters.
Well, the video will tell the story, that's for sure.
In terms of transversing the intersections, it would be more difficult for those larger vehicles to transverse for sure. If it comes to a point where we feel it's necessary, we, as Kent mentioned earlier, the central islands could be fully mountable if it's deemed that they have to be.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll jump in here too. And you know, the options we have shown here have these nice circular central islands. Those can be slightly modified in shape too to accommodate some of the larger vehicles, and that is something we looked a little bit at during our design process. So there is a way for some of those larger trucks to make it through this intersection. It's going to take a little bit of modification to that central island.
But we will go back and re-review the video to make sure that the truck counts are accurate.
No, thank you very much, and thank you guys for addressing this issue. It needs to be addressed because it's really a dangerous situation, and I appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Tom Lalsey, and I believe Tom currently on our list is our last person with their hand raised. If anybody else wants to raise their hand, please do so now. Otherwise, after Tom, we'll just do a quick wrap up and finish up. So Tom, you should be able to talk now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Lastly. I'm the business manager at Eagle Hill School, located at 45 Glenville. My compliments on an excellent presentation. Our opinion is that all of these options are an improvement because we look at it in terms of strictly safety, and I think they all add a certain level of safety. So we look forward to whatever option becomes the most safest, but we'll be flexible with all of our neighbors that have differing perspectives. And my question is in regards to the slide that showed all the pluses and minuses. I don't know if, can you go to that slide while I'm talking, please?
Yeah.
Right. So option 4 on this slide has the most pluses and the least minuses. Does that mean from a design and engineering point of view that would mean it's a semi-preferred option, or am I not interpreting this slide correctly?
I think your interpretation is a good one. We tried to summarize here the biggest factors that would come into play, with the exception of public input, because we didn't include that here, but you know, that's what we're here to solicit. There are other factors that may come into play, but these, based on these major factors, it would appear that option 4 would be one of the more preferred options, yes.
Thank you.
I'll wrap it up if Kent, do you want to go back to just the slide before this with my information on there?
Yep.
Yes. So again, I'm Jason Kaufman, a senior civil engineer with the Department of Public Works. We'll be managing this project for the town. You see listed is the project website, which has additional information, and also will have this presentation posted in the near future. And my email address and phone number are listed there as well. If anyone thinks of anything else later tonight or in the future, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to chat with anybody about this project. And again, we thank you all for joining us tonight. In this climate that we're in right now, unfortunately, we have to do these meetings virtually, but we appreciate everyone's input, and we thank you for joining us again.